Hi everyone and welcome to Cooking with Plants. It's Anja and today I'm super excited because I have a special guest joining me. Actually, two guests. So this main guest that I have with me is a general practitioner and board certified lifestyle medicine physician living in Melbourne, Australia. He has a graduate diploma in human nutrition, a plant-based nutrition certificate from Cornell, and is a fellow of the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine. He is a member of the Advisory Council of Doctors for Nutrition, and along with his beautiful partner, also provides education and resources through Plant-Based Health Australia and the website wholefoodsplantbasedhealth.com.au. So please join me in welcoming the wonderful Dr. Malcolm Mackay. Mackay? Mackay. I'm going to get it wrong, aren't I? And his beautiful partner, Jenny. So welcome. It's so lovely to have you here today and have you join me.
Thank you for having us on your show, Anja.
Thanks, Anja. I think I've said your name wrong and you've said my name wrong now. It's pronounced Anja, so being from Germany, the J is pronounced differently. But I keep saying your last name wrong, even though I think...
All right, so it would be Anja Mackay, not Anja Mackay.
Exactly. So yes, we both have to lock it in now. Well, the easy way I always say for people to remember my name is just to say Anja Lasagna. So there you go. It's the food connection now. So when you first went plant-based, I'm presuming you haven't been plant-based your entire life. What actually brought that change in lifestyle about? What made you go plant-based?
I'll try and give the short answer. I was 20 years old in medical school. There was a lecture on heart disease, and the cardiologist talked about the inevitable process of atherosclerosis, by which the arteries all over your body would get diseased. Sure, there were risk factors, but he did call it the inevitable process. And then he proceeded to show us all these gross slides of heart attacks, hearts and stroked out brains and gangrenous legs. Yeah. And I was like, for a 20-year-old, that didn't look very good. And yeah. I was getting back into distance running too, that I'd done a bit of at school. And within the same semester, someone else from the sort of public health arena gave us a talk and said, oh yeah, and there are plenty of people in the world, like those people in Highland, Papua New Guinea, who never get artery disease. Whatever they die of, they never get artery disease. When they die of, malaria or spear wounds or whatever, their arteries are clean. And these people, it was like they have a very low fat, very low salt. Well, they live on sweet potatoes. So I actually put two and two together. That was my real aha moment. It's like, what these people with not much education and hardly any medical technology, and they can prevent our number one killer. And so I was onto this. It just seemed to make sense to me that if I made the arteries healthier, all the tissues in my body would be healthier. Yeah. I'd be able to do my endurance running events better, and I'd be able to hopefully stay active for as long as possible in my life and enjoy things like activity like snow skiing. So I was in on this, and before long I was trying to eat a food diet based mostly on those very low fat, low salt, plant-based foods. Like I was eating oats and chickpeas and brown rice and lots of vegetables and fruits. Yeah. Over the years, I can't say I've been 100% vegan since then. There have been times when I've eaten small amounts of fish, or the family's had a chicken vegetable dish, and I've sort of chucked the bigger bits of chicken back into the pot, but still eating stuff that's got some animal in it. But I would say I'm completely plant-based now, and I think over the decades, I don't think I would have had more than 1% of my calories from animal products, and never. Because I found Nathan Pritikin quite early on in my journey. I was off the vegetable oils and rather modest on the nuts also right from the start.
Okay, wow. So that was quite early on in your, well, even before you started your medical career then, so you didn't really need to change it. So your beautiful partner Jenny here, so Jenny, were you actually plant-based when you met Malcolm, or did he introduce you to this lifestyle?
He introduced me to it. I was very typical. I thought I was, doing the right thing, having, small amounts of, fish and meat and all those things, to get all the nutrients I needed. So it was a bit of a surprise to me. I'd always been kind of leaning in towards being vegetarian, but never really gone there. So I was comfortable eating mostly plant-based diet, but it took me a while to kind of transition. and it took me a while on the intellect. It was really the intellectual side as well. It was, sort of, I thought I knew how to eat healthfully. So
Yeah.
but I've been for at least 10 years now, because we've known each other for 12 years. So yeah, I've been whole food plant-based for at least the past decade.
Wow. And have you noticed any differences in energy or anything really?
Look, it's hard to describe because I'm now about to turn 60. And so a decade ago, I think it's like you don't know what you've missed in that sense. I'm sure there were things awaiting me. I do have degeneration, osteoarthritis in one hip. Mm-hmm. And a decade ago, I saw an orthopedic surgeon, and he thought that I'd be back in for a full hip replacement, within a few years, and that was more than 10 years ago.
Wow.
And so I sort of feel like I've, dodged the bullet as such, that I'm still got my original joints. It's got a few issues, but in fact, the more sensitized I got to this way of eating, the more I notice if I eat the slightest bit off plan, like eat out at a restaurant, a salty, oily meal, that the hip pain comes back.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I find that even just having one oily meal, it just really throws me for days. And it could even be a very, very minimal amount of oil, because I try to avoid added oils for heart health reasons. But yeah, even just that tiny little bit of added salt or that tiny bit of added oil, and I just feel quite lethargic for quite a few days and just, not quite right. So yeah, it's interesting, very interesting. So when most people come to a plant-based lifestyle, the number one question is, and I'm sure you'll know this one, where do you get your protein? So as a doctor and his partner, where do you get your protein, and do you even see it as an issue?
No, it shouldn't be an issue. Interesting to consider the sort of, maybe this is the long answer, a different concept, like only plants make amino acids. Only plants can synthesize amino acids. Animals can chop and change them around a bit. And so plants grow the protein. The livestock comes along and eats it. And they're like a processing machine. They do concentrate the amino acids, and they take out the good stuff like the fiber and the antioxidants and stuff. And the processing machine, that might be a cow or a chicken, puts in bad stuff like cholesterol and saturated fat and other stuff. So they're just the middleman. When you look at the protein requirements of humans, and just the standard recommendations, which are, the recommended intakes are, usually being adjusted, to be cautious to, twice as much as our minimum requirement. Then if our requirement's about 10% of calories, then we have foods like oats and wheat that's about 14%, and legumes that are about 24% of calories. And if you eat adequate calories in your day to meet your calorie needs, it's pretty hard to put together a plant-based diet that doesn't also meet your protein needs. Unless, of course, you're making it on processed food like sugar syrups and coconut oil and things that have had the protein removed in the processing. So I would say if you have adequate calories, the protein issue's covered. The stuff about quality protein, that really went out the window years ago. No plant-based foods completely deficient in any essential amino acids. Some might be lower in one essential amino acids and another one might be higher in that one. And we don't have to combine together proteins from different plant sources in a single meal. The body sort of keeps a bit of a pool of protein, of amino acids, you know, from day to day. So if we just eat a variety of whole plant foods, you know, eat a few legumes, a few starchy vegetables, plenty of whole grains, a few fruits and vegetables, then we'll get all the amino acids we need, and we'll get a lot more than our minimum, and in fact more than the recommended safe intake of protein. And people say, but I'm an athlete, I need protein powder. Well, like I went for an 11-kilometer training run this morning, some interval training. Do I need more protein because I'm age group endurance runner? There's that age thing in there. Maybe I do, but because I do more exercise, I eat more calories, so I cover that easily.
Yeah, well, I found from my research that most disease, or most of the Western diseases, are actually linked to eating too much protein. And most people don't even know how much protein they need in a day. So it's all this advertising and marketing that's actually changing, or not changing people's minds, but actually bombarding people, and they think, oh, I need protein, I need protein, I need protein, but they don't know why, they don't know the type of protein, and they don't know how much protein. So
how much is a good point, because some of the apps and some of the websites and some of the bro science recommends ridiculous protein intakes that are way above any of the you know, standard science-based intakes. I'd like to weigh in one more point on the protein point, and that is, if you're already getting enough protein, which you will be if you had that bowl of oats and that rice and the beans and things over the last 24 hours, and you're getting enough calories, then you don't need more protein. If you take some protein powder, then your body will have to work hard to get rid of the nitrogen, you know, waste product, ammonia, urea. And what's left over, it'll just turn into sugar if it can, but otherwise it'll turn it into fat. So it'll just be like eating sugar or fat, because you didn't need that extra protein. And if you're taking the protein powder, it's got no fiber for the gut microbiome. It's got no anti-inflammatory substances that you'd need more of if you're an athlete. It's got no vitamins and minerals. So when you add protein powder to your breakfast, you displace calories that you might have got from something like oats, for example. And so you actually worsen your nutrition status by adding that protein powder. So my slogan is eat peas, not pea protein.
I love it. Yes, true. So, well, I guess in terms of protein, I actually think of it more as iron. I find that the protein-rich foods are actually iron-rich foods. So I focus more on, okay, where am I going to get my iron from? So it will be the beans and those types of things, and the oats, and try to keep those iron levels up. But I do find that a lot of ladies, especially when they start eating plant-based, their iron levels start to drop. So what do you recommend to eat or to supplement if need be, if iron levels are dropping?
Yeah.
One of the first things that we'll say is to eliminate the no iron foods, which are the processed foods. So if someone's eating a plant-based diet but not a whole food plant-based diet, it's to, when we look at people's food diaries, there's the refined grains, there's the oils, the simple syrups and things. And it's like, eliminate those. That's as much part of the equation as trying to seek out foods that are high in iron. It's really, it's looking at those foods that are displacing you getting iron.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really, really good way to look at it.
And to add in, I mean, beans and greens, whole grains have all got iron. There's that little point that you always want to eat fruit and vegetables when you eat your whole grains to enhance the iron absorption. I mean, you should do that for good health anyway.
You talk about the absorption, no?
Yeah, that was the iron absorption. And a lot of people don't eat enough vegetables either. So, adding in more vegetables to the meals is part of it as well. And hopefully when a woman has gone, because it's mainly the women that are low in iron, although I do sometimes see men low in iron, also, when you've been doing whole foods plant-based and getting lean and healthy, you have you in most cases have a much lower monthly iron loss. So that end of the equation will be improved as well by eating a plant-based diet. Of course, for people eating a general Western diet, apart from oil for everybody who's even plant-based, oil's just stacks of calories and no iron, as sort of Jenny suggested. Dairy foods are really bad. Dairy foods inhibit iron absorption. So that's another, that they actually probably have a worse than neutral effect on your iron status.
Yeah, well, generally speaking, people who are eating whole food plant-based, and particularly females, report that their iron status has never been better. So I think it's that transition. It's if someone goes vegetarian and not necessarily healthful vegetarian, that their iron gets worse. And then if they go vegan and haven't eliminated the processed foods, that it might not pick up.
The whole foods and having a variety and eating enough of those different.
Eating enough is an absolute key for all nutrients. If someone's under eating by half their calories, then they're under eating. They're not getting all of the nutrients: the zinc, the iron, the protein, and fibre, and all of that.
And this can. It sounds sexist. This can be a bit more of a challenge for women rather than men because of all the social pressure around eating and things, that it's just not sort of considered ladylike to sort of, like your mates might laugh at a male who eats, a gross amount of food. Although once at our ski club, a lady stormed off and went to another table because she said I was disgusting because I had too much food in my bowl. I was a bit stunned because I'd just been skiing all day. But women are under this pressure to, not be in that category, of just eating enormous amounts of food and things. And when you go plant-based, it's all such low calorie density and feeding plenty of vegetables as well. Then you will need to eat big serves of rice and big serves of beans and a lot of potatoes and a lot of vegetables. I'm always impressed when I see Jenny's 85-year-old mother serve food for herself from a whole foods plant-based buffet, at even how much an 85-year-old lady can pile on her plate. So that's a tip as well for all nutrients, to eat enough food. And if someone was, if I see a patient who's still got an iron problem, in the short to medium term, I may recommend an iron supplement. I'd often recommend, an iron polymaltose, the Malto Fair Fur brand, because it's meant to be easier on your tummy. And I tend to sort of, recommend that they sort of don't overdo the supplementation, because otherwise they might get, tummy problems and things. And then, of course, in medicine, we've all sort of forgotten that you absorb things through the gut. And a lot of doctors now will just be, oh, right, off for an iron infusion. And if you're really seriously iron deficient, an intravenous, iron infusion will sort of fill up your reserves really quickly, but hopefully you'll follow up that by changes in diet such that you don't keep needing to have those iron top-ups.
Oh, fantastic. That's great news. So I speak to a lot of older ladies, myself included, who have menopause and are wanting to keep their bones strong. Now, personally, I eat a lot of greens. I go to the gym and I do some resistance training, and I use things like almond milk that are high in calcium. But what do you personally recommend for calcium and keeping bones strong?
Well, first of all, I'd like to I'd like to disconnect eating calcium and strong bones. Australia has an extraordinarily high calcium recommendation for postmenopausal women. Almost no one meets it. Research has found that liquid milk probably actually makes bones worse because of the inflammatory milk sugar. That even diets high in calcium don't really seem to protect the bone. We need adequate calcium, but that's not very much. And when you eat a whole foods plant-based diet, when your diet's low in animal protein and low in salt, you lose less calcium through the kidneys. So the requirement for calcium is reduced. And that's reflected and articulated as such in the World Health Organization calcium intake recommendations. So, I mean, I'd be saying eat beans and greens and all those foods, and anyway, a healthy whole foods plant-based diet. if you do that, you'll get a calcium intake that might be 700 or 800 milligrams a day, which is adequate for someone on a low salt, low animal protein diet. And then there are other things in the plants that help as well, like inflammation, for example, is bad for bone. And this diet is anti-inflammatory. There are other substances in the diet as well. I think the phytates and a few other phytochemicals in plants actually help the bone strength to improve. Vitamin D is important. I actually take a supplement down here in Melbourne during the winter but that's a bit of a lifestyle thing. I'm just not out in the sun enough in the middle of the day. So vitamin D is important. And then you got something very right there, Anja, that your body's very efficient and it'll only maintain as much bone strength as it needs. So if you're sitting around all day, your body just thinks, well, I don't need a strong thigh bone, and just all I do is sit on it. And so you really do need to exercise, including strength work, squats or walking up and down steep hills, or so you do. I would recommend that older ladies engage on regular strength work to strengthen the bones.
I'll just add that I'm aware of my age, and I'm quite lean. That if I have, if I get a scan, that they're probably going to put me into that osteopenic category, just by nature of the fact that your bones don't need to be as strong if you're light. And my way of kind of overcoming that is that I focus really heavily on doing, on working out, on some resistance training. I even, hadn't run for many years with my hip joint, but in the past year and a half, I've even, thinking also of bone strength, I've actually started doing a small amount of running, just so there's a little bit of that impact, knowing that that's going to be, building stronger bones. So it's,
fantastic. So exercise,
building muscle and building bones is really important.
Fantastic. So yes, we need to exercise in the sun and have a picnic of whole foods. Sounds like a great combination. Okay, so now I've got a few questions from people from my website who had some questions when I posed the question of if you could ask a plant-based doctor any question that you like, what would it be? So I've got a few questions from people. And the first one of those is, do I get enough DHA and EPA from 1 tablespoon of ground chia and 1 tablespoon of ground flax a day?
Yes.
You don't even need that much.
No, you don't even need that much. We eat about a tablespoon of flax each in our morning porridge bowl. Mm-hmm. Without that, we'd probably still be just fine, because there's plant-based omega-3s, alpha-linolenic acid, in leafy greens, in soy products, in many foods actually. The problem is that the body needs to take those plant-based omega-3s, the ALA, and convert it into the long-chain DHA and EPA. And people are concerned that humans might not do that very efficiently, which sort of make us like obligate carnivore omnivores, really, but that's not true. And the body also uses the same enzymes to take the linoleic acid, that's the omega-6 essential fats that are widespread in our food supply, and turn them into arachidonic acid, which is sort of a precursor for inflammatory mediators, and we do need some inflammatory mediators. In fact, we need more omega-6s than omega-3s. But because it shares the same enzyme system, if you just flood the body with omega-6 fats, you're eating sunflower oil and you're eating cupfuls of almonds and whole avocados and things, then you can distract or make that enzyme less available for taking the ALA, the plant-based omega-3s, and for the body to convert it into DHA and EPA. And so it's been said that that process is inefficient, but there's some research that shows that it's efficient enough, as you'd probably expect. And if people sort of think, but my body won't turn all the plant-based ones into long chain, it's like, no, you're not a fish, you're not a cold water fish. Your body's not meant to have too much DHA in it. It's probably a risk factor for some diseases like diabetes. So the long and the short of it is that if you don't flood your body with omega-6s from oils and excessive, high omega-6 nuts, and to be absolutely sure there's plenty of omega-3s for that enzyme to convert, you have maybe 1 tablespoon a day of flax or chia as one of the very few nut seeds that actually have a decent omega-3 content, then I would say you'd be just fine. I guess the situation where I might recommend a microalgal DHA, that is the plant-based DHA, might be pregnant woman, is not going to do whole foods plant-based, is eating far too many oils and nut products. And then I might recommend the supplement during pregnancy to make sure. But otherwise, for the rest of us, even if you're an old person or a young person, I'd say no. And I'd add to that that the promoters of supplements like the fish oil, the classic omega-3 DHA supplement, that the heart disease protection, which was touted for decades, has failed. Lots of studies have come out and said, no, this stuff doesn't protect against heart disease at all. And it's sort of like the industry's moved on and said, well, okay, what about brain health? We'll work on that now.
Yeah. Well, there always has to be a marketing angle, doesn't there? So at the end of the day, there wasn't all this processed stuff, even back in the 50s, I guess. It's a pretty recent thing when all this commercialization has come into place and all the marketing has really skyrocketed. So all these things are just escalating and we've become a very processed society. At the end of the day, our bodies haven't really changed, especially in the last 50, 100 years. And our bodies know how to process foods and grains and things that come from Mother Nature. So I don't know, interfering with that process just doesn't make sense to me. And
that's a good point too, that interfering with that process. It's sort of like if you're eating whole plant foods, if you're eating a mixture of, whole grains and legumes and fruits and veg, and, maybe you're taking some B12 because you don't drink muddy water and maybe some D because you don't live out in the sun. But if you're just eating those basic foods in adequate calorie amounts, then actually it's got this sort of optimal mix of vitamins, minerals, fiber, protective phytonutrients in it. And if you suddenly add in concentrate and add in a concentrate of one particular nutrient, then you run the risk of actually interfering with the utilization and processing of other nutrients and actually giving yourself increased health risks. So when people think, I'll take this just in case, there's actually the potential to increase your health risk. That was studied with beta carotene, that smokers with higher beta carotene intake got less lung cancer, but then if you gave them a supplement, they got more lung cancer, probably because the beta carotene was just a marker of the intake of a whole bunch of carotenoids, all taken in the right proportion as they're present in whole plant foods.
Yeah. Well, I guess this leads me on to another question which I got, which is if you have allergies or intolerances to things like gluten, soy, nuts and seeds, what are your options for balanced nutrition? So I guess that leads on from what you were just saying, to just have a variety of those vegetables, those natural foods, those whole foods. And
well, I'd say sometimes, if you've got celiac disease, then I guess you're never going to tolerate, gluten-containing grains, although there are plenty of grains that have not gluten-containing. If you've got an anaphylaxis to peanuts, maybe it'll get less severe, but I wouldn't test that. You've probably got it. You've probably gone past a tipping point, if you like. But a lot of food intolerances are more intolerances than allergies. And when people do whole foods plant-based, we've seen people that sort of, thought they were a bit intolerant to wheat and a bit intolerant to that. And once they healed their gut to a healthy state, and they had a bit of fructose intolerance, and then further down the track, they're able to eat a lot of those foods. Suddenly they're able to eat onions again. They're able to eat more fruit. They're able to, given they're not allergic or celiac, they're able to eat the gluten-containing grains. So I would say to those people, you want to heal your gut by taking out on my website under gut health, we've actually got a restore your gut health section sort of aimed at sort of a semi-elimination diet for helping people to restore their gut health, to increase their tolerance of foods. But if someone doesn't and isn't going to tolerate gluten-containing grains, then many of them can still eat oats. And then there are all the other grains, and the grains are a very diverse group. And so there's sort of no such thing as an intolerance, a generic intolerance to all grains. You could go and eat, most people can tolerate brown rice. Most people can tolerate buckwheat, although it's a not uncommon allergy in Asia. And I'd say the same, if you're intolerant to soy protein, then there's probably other legumes you can eat. And then, of course, the other source of, let's say, complex carbohydrate-based calories in our diet are the starchy vegetables like potatoes and sweet potatoes.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much variety. Yeah, you can eat so much of that. I think the first 2 years that I was plant-based, I didn't even touch any soy products because at the time I didn't know how to cook tofu properly and I didn't like the taste of it. I never went out and bought soy milk or anything like that. So, and every time I went and got a blood test, it was perfect. So you don't need those types of products. And a lot of the processed vegan foods, the junk foods, have the gluten and high concentrated levels of soy and the pea protein isolates and all those types of things. So we want to stay away from those anyway. So there's lots of other options, like you mentioned, the sweet potatoes and other types of grains. So definitely a lot of variety out there. So another question which I got was which veggies are bad for psoriatic arthritis? I've heard potatoes are because they're in the nightshade family. My husband says tomatoes are, but of course I love potatoes. I would want to know about inflammatory foods.
There was an excellent podcast on the rheumatoid solutions podcast. There's been an excellent, I think the one before last was interviewing someone who healed their psoriatic arthritis. There may be the occasional person who has some intolerance to tomatoes, probably less commonly potatoes. The whole nightshades are bad for joints idea was around decades ago. I've never seen it go anywhere. I think it would, I don't think it's a common problem at all. So I would say to people with rheumatoid arthritis, with psoriatic arthritis, no, don't worry about the nightshade stuff. Focus on other things like we've been reading about salt lately, and for example, having more salt in the diet sort of dysregulates the immune system and increases the severity of autoimmune disease and joint disease. And of course, if you look at the whole big field of gut microbiome, the gut microbiome has such a huge role in regulating the immune system and controlling inflammation. And of course, the food for the gut microbiome is high fiber foods, including resistant starch from grains and beans and other whole plant foods.
So would you recommend
they have food intolerances? And I guess with an autoimmune condition, people often need to pare their diet right back to an elimination diet and then to add in things. So yeah, there could be something quite simple, that someone's eating often, mushrooms or tomatoes. But yeah, just what Malcolm's saying is that there's not a whole class of foods that someone's going to be intolerant to. There just might be individual foods.
The person interviewed in the Rheumatoid Solutions podcast, I think he ate mostly buckwheat for a period of time. And sort of like, I normally say to people, potatoes and brown rice are usually some of the more benign, less likely to upset people foods.
Sweet potatoes in particular.
And sweet potatoes. But there's there's no universally tolerated food. I mean, there are some that are more likely to cause problems, like perhaps the gluten-containing foods, but there's no universally safe food for people with severe food intolerance and autoimmune disease.
So I guess if people kept a food diary and a log of any pains or any issues that they have, yeah, like you said, take it back to basics, start with those very basic foods, and then keep a diary and consult with a doctor like yourself and maybe get some blood tests, etc., and just monitor how they're going. I guess that's the only way to really take it back to basics and see what is actually affecting you and what is not. So yeah, some good tips there. Okay, so another question was meal planning in order to ensure a wholesome meal devoid of any deficiencies.
Well, when we think of a meal, we usually think of, I should be letting Jenny Cameron say this actually.
Well, we start by saying, well, which starches are we going to eat? Going to be, you know, which grain, which legume, and then you add in some vegetables, and throughout your day you have some fruit. Really, in terms of meal planning, if you're selecting from those 4 key food groups, you know, whole grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruit,
Yeah.
that's all you really need to do for meal planning. I mean, obviously you need to stock your pantry and stock your refrigerator so that you've got adequate amounts of foods from those 4 food groups. And, you know, you mix it up in whatever ratio, quantity that suits you. You know, some people like to eat more legumes, some people like to eat less. We always say to someone who's leery of legumes or who's been on a low FODMAP diet, you know, to include some, just some. Doesn't have to be 2 cups a day.
Even a dessert spoon a day.
A tablespoon.
Yeah.
To gradually, for the gut microbiome, to gradually build some diversity and tolerance. Another way to look at a basic plate model is half the plate's one of the so-called, what you might call the starches, like half the plate is taken up by some sort of whole grain and or legume and or potato type vegetable, and the other half of the plate will have the non-starchy vegetables, you know, and your broccoli and your green leafy vegetables and maybe a non-plant food like a fungus, mushrooms and things. And a big plug here, when we're talking about that, we've become quite enthusiastic about green leafy vegetables. We even have a side of kale before digging into the morning porridge bowl.
Yes, same. Yes, I love my veggies for breakfast. So I think more and more people are coming on board with getting their head around that and not just thinking I have to have toast in the morning or I have to have oats in the morning. And it's very good to have those greens in the morning, and it's energizing too. And yeah, even if I just start with a bowl of veggies in the morning, I just find it's light and it gives me energy and I get through the morning, and so much better than if I have a heavier meal or something sweet based as well. You mentioned, so obviously beans are high in things like the iron and the protein that we were talking about earlier. Some people can't tolerate them. So you're saying just incorporate a small amount each day, even if it's just a tablespoon, and work your way up.
And there's some things you can do around the intolerance in terms of the way they're cooked. Different brands, if you buy tin beans, some tin beans can cause more of a problem for people than others. So I think it's to do with the way they're cooked. And so if you sort of lock onto a bean manufacturer where you tolerate those beans, you know, stick with them. Note that if what you want isn't on the shelf and you buy another brand, it might be a problem. Just looping back to the salt issue, that they've also found that, I mean, we always, you know, avoid salt with our beans, that you can actually increase bloating by increasing the salt. So it might not be the beans so much, it might be things like salt in the diet that are causing the intolerance, you know, causing the bloating.
Yeah. Well, I guess talking of salt, that leads me to the next question of oil, sugar, and salt. So I guess all 3 of us try to avoid those added processed junk type ingredients. So in terms of oil, sugar, and salt, I know a lot of times I hear, oh, you need a little bit of oil or you need a little bit of salt in your diet. Personally, I think we get our oils from the foods we eat anyway. We get our omega-3s from things like adding the flax seeds, so that's going to be a lot healthier anyway. From all the research I've seen, oil is actually inflammatory to arteries. It increases your chance of having a heart attack, all those types of things. It's not a health food, it's a processed food at the end of the day. Even olive oil, which has been marketed as being a health food, when I've actually looked at all the research behind it, its marketing companies have skewed the message that's gotten out. Similar things with sugar and salt. So also things like salt, as far as I understand, can actually remove some of the calcium from your body, and it's not that great for your bones. So we don't want to be flushing that goodness that we've got in our bodies out because the salt is draining it out of our bodies. So what's your take on all of these ingredients and adding them to your food? And do we need things like a little pinch of salt here and there? And is it actually necessary, or can we get our salt from things like celery and tomatoes and those types of things that naturally have salt in them?
Well, first of all, I think I'll destroy olive oil. Like, it's got more saturated fats, you know, percent calorie wise than is recommended for people. It's a very poor source of omega-3s. It's got a lot less polyphenols than most whole plant foods are. As you said, it's not good for arteries, and you know, it's only a Mediterranean diet. It's only good in the context of a diet that has more fruit and vegetables and legumes and whole grains.
And it's got no iron, no calcium,
no protein,
no fiber, no protein,
and stacks of calories. Like, if you're a woman eating 2,000 calories a day and you have a Mediterranean diet with 3 Australian tablespoons of olive oil, you've used up a quarter of your day's calories and got you know, no nutrients out except for a tiny bit of vitamin E. So that's my demolition. Oh, and there's stuff about you need fat to absorb fat-soluble vitamins. They've actually shown that, you know, people on very low-fat diets still absorb the fat-soluble vitamins, you know, the carotenoids, etc. And there's even been some research on vitamin E showing that really we were looking at the wrong thing when the studies suggested you needed to add fats to food to absorb fat-soluble vitamins. They found with the vitamin E that you will absorb it into the intestinal cells with virtually no fat in the meal. And of course, all our meals have some fat because there's fat in whole grains and fat in vegetables and legumes. Yeah. Pretty hard to design a diet for one of these studies, like lettuce leaves. But if you have lettuce leaves and vitamin E, then it gets absorbed into the intestinal cells, but then it sits there and it doesn't appear in the blood. So you measure the blood and say it's not absorbed, but it's sitting in the intestinal cells, like in the waiting room. And then as subsequent meals come along with, you know, small amounts of fats and oils, then it starts to get packaged and go off into the bloodstream. Well, moving on to sugars, syrups. You know, we don't add sugar to our food, but the consumption of sugar in Australia doesn't seem to have gone up over the decades. It's far too much, and it always was far too much. It doesn't explain the obesity epidemic. Right? Some industries try and hide behind that. You know, I think some of the industries that have tried and use it as a bit of a scapegoat, not that it's a good thing to eat. I would say if you need to sweeten your food, I mean, I'll also say, you know, if our soy milk has 1 gram of added sugar, that's 1/5 of a teaspoon per 100 mils, we're not too worried about that tiny trace of sugar. We're not too worried about.
And we do use some condiments, you know, a tomato sauce that might have, you know, a small amount of sugar. But once we reach for something that does have, you know, a significant amount of added sugar, that's when we're really mindful of having it only in very small quantities. So I would say we don't go out of our way to add sugar, but where there is any sugar, we're mindful of keeping it to a minimum. So we're not a zero added sugar family.
Yeah, I think the chili paste has quite a bit of sugar in it, but you can't eat much of it. Yeah. I would say whenever we're doing cooking, if you're cooking or trying to sweeten something, at least use, raisins or dates in there, because at least you're getting all getting most of the nutrients, you're getting the fiber, which is really important. As we said, if you're out there looking at your food thinking, oh, wonder what's got protein in it. No, the first thing you should always be doing when you're selecting foods is, or a question you'd be asking yourself that no one asks, it's like, where do you get your fiber from? Does it have fiber in it? In which case, okay, yeah, it's maybe something I'd eat. So yeah, I'd say use dried fruits or fresh fruits for a sweetening agent. Yes, we move on to salt, and there's some recipe books where we actually say to people, great recipes, but just don't put the teaspoon of salt in there. Don't put as much soy sauce in there. And when we say salt, there's a lot of things that are really high in salt that people don't recognize, like soy sauce, Bragg's aminos, miso. You'll have to be careful with all of those. Some of them are very high in salt. And as Jenny said, we've been looking into salt and found that it upregulates, autoimmune disease and inflammatory disease. It's, as Dr. Goldhammer said in a talk the other day, it's used as a food preservative. It's not good for microbes to grow in. It's not good for the gut microbiome. It's going to suppress some of the function of the gut microbiome. It's going to blow you up with fluid. So there's a lot of reasons to keep the sodium intake really low. If you're an athlete and you are losing a lot of salt, well, your body would acclimatize and the sweat would become less salty. Even if you did need extra salt, if you ate 1 or 2 slices of bread or half a teaspoon of Bragg's or something in your day, you've upped your sodium quite a lot. So I don't think there's only a few diseases where you might need more salt. There's an neuroadaptation here, and the food industry knows that Australians are just accustomed to everything having salt in it. So they know that they have to put salt in the food, and a moderately large amount. And any targets that they've dumbed down, the targets we set in the food industry, they have just tried to tackle their highest salt foods and bring them down to a moderately bad salty level. And the NH and MRC changed their recommendations a few years ago, sort of up the level of sodium they recommended, because it would sort of match in with the food supply. I mean, it would be an improvement on what Australians eat, but they weren't aiming, I guess a lot of these things were aiming for public health improvement. But if you're an individual with autoimmune disease or high blood pressure or fluid,
even osteoarthritis,
then you want to go further than the public health recommendations. You want to get your sodium down to less than 1,500 milligrams a day, perhaps even quite a lot lower than that. And that means not adding any salt to your food. And it also means even some salty foods being fairly modest about it. Like, for example, bread is pretty much universally moderately high in salt. So, if someone eats several slices of bread in the day, they've actually greatly increased their salt intake. So that's sort of our take on the whole salt thing. So, I'd say the neuroadaptation process will happen if you regularly, actually it could be a problem, because if you regularly don't use salt in your meals and you minimize salty condiments, and then you go out to a restaurant to eat something anyone else has made, then it'll be too salty. You'll probably get really thirsty, accumulate fluid, have a bad sleep. But hey, it's better than the rest of the population who are like that every day.
Well, I guess oil, sugar, and salt, they're all, if you have them in your foods, they cause addiction too. You become, I've noticed people, if they start eating saltier foods or more processed foods, then you want more. So those 3 things, oil, sugar, and salt, they're designed to make you crave something else. So if you go to the movies, there's your popcorn with the salt, because that's going to make you then crave the drink to go with it, the soda to go with it, which has the sugar. And then you're also going to want the ice cream. And it's that snowball effect of our society and getting people addicted to these foods. So if someone is suffering from food addiction or obesity, that type of thing, then I guess eliminating these things as well will really numb down that addiction to the food as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when industry know this, and in fact, they even put people into functional MRI scanners to make sure that their processed food hits a bliss point and lights up the right parts of the brain, which is almost something wrong with doing that, I think.
Yeah.
You know, and they basically, you know, a lot of the processed foods are like sugar, salt, and fat in different proportions held together with some refined grains. Certainly in the food addiction area, you know, often when people do whole plant foods, they find that they don't have their binging and cravings when they're not actually eating those foods. Like you just seem to be, it just seems to be a thing that doesn't happen as much with whole natural foods. And yeah, like when you look at the addiction bit, I've listened to Dr. Alan Goldhammer before, and he's had a very good recent interview on the Rich Roll podcast. And he says, he's quite funny. He says, like, do you tell an alcoholic to drink from a smaller cup? It's like if someone's obese, it's like, it's not that they haven't tried, it's just moderation just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So sometimes, you know, I mean, there's some merit in moderation versus, you know, progress versus, you don't want to let perfection get in the way of progress. But sometimes, you know, if cheese is your addiction, then you just need to treat it like you would another addiction, and sometimes, and just go, no, because, you know, if moderation didn't work for you in the past and you become obese eating that sort of food, then why would you expect it to work in the future?
And moderation, I mean, what's moderation? Your moderation could be totally different to my moderation. So
Exactly, yeah.
yeah.
And that behavioural aspect is one of the real issues with oil, salt and sugar. And we often hear from people who, you know, oh, well, I don't have much, or, you know, it's okay, you know, I understand the no oil, but it's okay, you know, I only have a little. And what I've found is if a person is not going out of their way to avoid oil or to avoid sugar or to avoid salt, they end up having quite a lot of it. Because, you know, it's like whether it's that recipe they make at home and they put that pinch of salt in, or, you know, they're eating out often enough. And when we say eating out, I, you know, include going to the cafe for lunch, you know, on a working day. You're eating food prepared by others, as well as, you know, not going out of your way to avoid these things even within the home. And if you look at someone's food intake, you know, they're not an exact science doing a food record, but if you, you know, as closely as you can do, when you look at what someone's actually eating and you match it against a food database, you find that they're having a very high salt diet, a very high fat diet, and, you know, a low nutrient diet. So I think that's really important. It's that thing of sometimes, you know, we're criticised for being too strict in recommending that you minimise these foods. But it's, if someone has that mentality, and even in the plant-based world, oh, a little bit of this is okay, a little bit of that's okay, then you know they're probably on a slippery slope to these things just increasing in their diet.
Well, to
Dr.
me,
McDougall told me it was all right. Actually, what he really said was, you know, if you're transitioning to a starch-based diet, then if you need to have any salt, don't add it in the cooking. Like sprinkle a little bit of it on your potatoes or something at the end. It's like, if that's what it takes to get you to do the transition and actually eat potatoes or rice, then so be it. But it's not intended as a green light to adding salt.
Everything.
And when you're talking about the food addiction, salt is an appetite stimulant. I even noticed this myself. Like, you know, if I'm sort of feel like I'm getting a bit underweight and I need to eat and I'm not that hungry, if I add a little bit of something slightly salty to my lunch, I notice the appetite flavor enhancing effect of that salt. And I've done some research on that. And then if you feed people the same food with no salt and then with a little bit of salt in it, they eat more when there's salt in there. So that's for someone with an issue with weight control, that can be an issue. And that's probably one of the reasons why bread can give people problems, is that part of what sort of makes people sometimes eat more than they need is that it's salty.
and your palate,
apart from what they might put on it.
Your palate changes too. If you cut out those foods, it'll adapt, and within a few weeks, you actually taste the flavor of the actual food rather than
put something really funny. I just changed my diet, and my cooking was, I was using an electric fry pan, and I remember that living in college, and I made this chickpea vegetable dish and shared it with one of my friends, ate some of it, And he said, Malcolm, your food's bland and too spicy. And it was bland because it didn't have a salt in it.
Yeah.
And it was spicy because I tried to overcompensate with curry powder.
Fair enough. Curry powder's good. So is chili and lemon, all those sorts of things.
Unfortunately, now some of the spice mixes, like some of our favourite brands of spice mix, are doing a bit of a shift to adding more salt to them. So, you know, if you're buying your favourite curry and spice blends, just sort of have a look and see if you can see how much. You know, if there was a trace, you know, if it was just a few percent salt, we wouldn't be worried. But if it was 25% or more, you know, if it's quite a large amounts of salt in there, like a cheap filler, then yeah, it could be a problem if you use a lot of it.
Yeah, I've even noticed in some curry powders they have oil in them. So I think, why do you need oil in there? So yeah, it's definitely important to check the ingredients list and know exactly what you're getting. So I think my big takeaway from this discussion today is focus on fiber. That is really, really good, because it doesn't matter which meal it is or what food it is. If you're focusing on the fiber and you're grabbing a packet of cookies or crisps or whatever, and well, there's no fiber there and there's no water content there. So if I'm looking at a potato, fiber and water. If I'm looking at some strawberries, there's fiber and water. So it's a really simple way to break it down. So I think, yes, the focus is focus on your fiber. Fantastic. So what does a day of eating look like in the life of Malcolm and Jenny? What do you eat for breakfast, lunch, dinner? Do you have snacks, and do you eat at certain times of the day?
I think it is good to have a routine. You know, your whole body has clocks in it, and your gut has a clock, and your microbiome probably has a clock. And if you always eat breakfast, your body will feel hungry at breakfast. And if you always eat that big supper before bed, I'm trying to break away from that by eating even more during the day. Then your body will call for food first in the evening when it doesn't really need it. Breakfast for us starts off, well, I have a glass of water when I get out of bed, and then a cup of tea, which I'll fess up to, you know, caffeinated tea. And then I go and train for an hour or so. For breakfast, we have a side of steamed kale. We use the microwave, you don't have to. We have a side of microwave steamed kale, which is probably about a couple of cups of broken up kale between the two of us. And then we tip off the water, the little bit of water in that to use for evening stock, and add a bit of balsamic vinegar to it. And that's like, so we each have a little plate with a side of steamed kale with balsamic vinegar. Then we move on to the porridge mix, which I guess between the two of us would average about, I'd eat a bit more and Jenny a bit less, about a cup of oats, about a tablespoon of flax, and a small handful of raisins. And when it's cooked, we add a variety of frozen berries in it, and I usually throw a kiwi fruit or something else in mine as well. So that's breakfast done. I was eating a fruit salad for morning tea. Like, you know, it might be a couple of kiwi fruits and an orange. Although recently I've been eating my air fried potato for morning tea. It's still sort of a bit warm, and somehow that's the time of the day when I like eating a potato. Then I move on to lunch, and often we cook a bigger vegetable bean dish than we need to, and more rice or millet or whatever than we need to. So if we're at home, we'll often have leftovers. If I'm at work, I'll take a container of last night's vegetable dish with legumes, and I'll take about half a kilo of diced up sweet potatoes. And it could be pre-cooked, or I could microwave it, you know, half an hour before lunch. One patient before lunch, it's like, better stick the sweet potatoes in the microwave. Anything to add for lunch?
Well, I usually just have last night's leftovers. And
sometimes we have a bit of salad with our lunch when we're home. We're quite big on cooked vegetables. We probably should eat more salads. And then we get to the afternoon, and that's now when I tend to eat quite a few bits of fruit. And Jenny's been making, can make fruit cake, but she's recently been making these Chef AJ banana oat cookies. And so I have some of them in the afternoon.
I think I've lost you. You've frozen now. Your video has frozen.
Snaps.
Oh,
Check the internet hasn't
oh,
died.
there you're back.
Yeah, we're back. So we often have a bit of these rice, and I know those, even though they're brown rice snaps and they don't have oil in them, I know they're processed because they try and make you eat more of them. But I try and make sure I put more hummus on them, use them as little shovels. And then the evening meal, and we're in that pattern where we have a grain, and it used to be more often brown rice, maybe with a bit of black rice mixed with it. Hey, you can mix a few lentils with your rice and cook your legumes and rice at the same time. But lately, sometimes we have freekeh or millet or buckwheat. And we usually do a big stir fry that starts off with the browning the onions with no oil, and then gradually has more and more and more vegetable dishes and tomatoes and mushrooms and stacks of leafy green added. And usually Jenny also steams some other, zucchini and broccoli and cauliflower and things on the side as well. So that's sort of our big evening meal. And in terms of quantities, I probably have about, if it was rice, I'd probably have about 3 cups of cooked rice. You'd probably have about 2. So my dinner bowl weighs just over 1 kilogram. Jenny's is probably just a little bit less than that. So in terms
which is about double in pounds, isn't it? Probably 2.2 pounds.
Yeah, about 2.2 pounds. Yeah.
I've tried to, I'm more conscious the last sort of year or so about the impact of eating on sleep. So I'm trying to have, where I can, an even bigger lunch and just sort of back off slightly on the evening meal, but it's still a pretty huge meal. I think I once, we occasionally, Malcolm will often weigh his food to make sure he's eating enough. But sometimes I'll weigh it just thinking, oh, how much am I having here? Sort of like 200 grams of cooked rice. But the only variation in my day is that, I have a bit of fruit for snacks. Morning tea is usually a banana, and afternoon tea some fruit. And if I'm feeling like I need a few extra calories, one of those cookies is great. Or in the morning when Malcolm's getting ready to go to work, I usually air fry a couple of potatoes. So there's sort of one left for me to have. So that might be my afternoon tea.
Yeah.
And
I think we might have even cooked a piece of sweet corn. I got home a little bit earlier yesterday, and I think we cooked a piece of sweet corn as well. I ate about 2/3 of that.
Yeah.
I love eating, sort of raw carrot and celery and cucumber and snow peas. So I usually have a little bowl of those. I might cut them just prior to the evening meal, but I'll put whatever's left in the fridge, which I'll have at lunch the next day. So, and it's pretty similar day after day. It really only varies. Pre-COVID, when I used to travel, and that would be quite a different day's food intake. But most of the time we eat at a similar time every day, a similar amount of food every day, and similar kind of makeup. Grains, legumes, vegetables and fruit. And
I would eat more fruit than Jenny. In fact, I found a document printed out on a dot matrix printer that I did in the late 80s, and it was a fruity Pritikin diet, a dietary analysis. So I've always eaten quite a lot of fruit. For anyone that's scared of fruit, maybe don't drink lots of fruit juice. But fresh fruit has only ever been associated in, observational studies with better health outcomes, with even better diabetes outcomes. You've got people like the Mastering Diabetes group and Robbie Barbero, type 1 diabetic. Diabetes came under much better control, less insulin requirements when he went on a really high fruit diet. So I'd say to people, don't be scared of fruit.
Yeah. No, don't be scared of fruit. Just the oil, the sugar, the salt, the non-fiber foods. Fantastic. So
you haven't asked us about whether Jenny and Malcolm are anti-nuts.
Well, that was my question. My next question was, I noticed you didn't have any nuts or seeds in that other than your flax seeds. So do you add those to your daily intake?
Well, there's the flaxseed in the morning. Just occasionally, in a stir fry, we might put, I call it a heaped teaspoon. I won't put a tablespoon into the peanut butter jar, just a teaspoon, just to sort of flavour, a stir fry, maybe with tempeh or tofu.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll put a little shake of sesame seeds into something, but it's pretty minimal. we keep a bowl of walnuts in their shell on the bench with the nutcracker sitting on top. So occasionally
We had one each about
that's
5 days ago.
but it's not a daily thing. It's like, it's not where we source our calories from. It's just something that's, you know, maybe crushed up and included with something we're eating, but not a big part of our day. Yeah.
It's sort of an area.
Avocado. I love avocado, and I buy those fairly small ones. And literally, I'll take 3 or 4 days to go through one. And unfortunately, there's often, you know, a quarter of an avocado sitting in the fridge that I forget about. I have to throw out. So yeah, I like a little bit. Again, I use it as a flavouring, a spread on something. You know, if I am gonna, sometimes I do have some bread. If there hasn't been enough leftover rice or milk, I might add, you know, a slice of wholemeal bread, and I'll spread it with a bit of avocado, you know, put tomato and Tabasco sauce on top.
And our position in the nut wars, is really that most of the evidence for a healthy whole foods plant-based diet for disease reversal lies with the more starch-based end of the spectrum rather than the more oil fat-based end of the spectrum, which would be more nuts, seeds, avocados. So it's like the runs on the board, and most of the healthy populations that have eaten predominantly whole plant foods, it's been some kind of starchy food, you know, McDougall style. So where does that leave? So the runs are on the board for the more starch-based end of the spectrum. Who could eat more? And I think if you try to reverse disease, like, you know, heart disease, I'd be going for the more starch-based end of the spectrum. We actually see people, when we look at diet dogs, when I see patients, that really overdo the nuts and seeds. And it's easy to do because they're so super high in calories per volume, so it doesn't even look like you're eating enough of them. I find there's sometimes a problem with people's weight, sometimes a problem with the gut, sometimes even seem to be a problem with the blood cholesterol level. So,
and with inflammation, we've seen people resolve joint issues when they've been eating a fairly healthful whole food plant-based diet already. And you look at their food diary and suggest that, you know, maybe skip the peanut butter for a little while, you know, don't do that every day, along with, you know, the cashews and the almonds and the avocados, and just lowering that, you know, the sort of the omega-6 to 3 ratio, lowering that, I think, seems to make a difference.
Most of the nuts and seeds are very high in omega-6s and very low in omega-3s. And in the overall diet, we want to have a reasonable proportion of omega-3s. So if you have too many almonds and cashews and things, you know, you tip the balance towards away from the omega-3s. And chia and flax are higher in omega-3, and, you know, walnuts and hemp are moderate in omega-3s, but most of the other nuts and seeds are actually quite low. It's not to say they're unhealthy foods, you know, lots of fiber and nutrients, but we do see problems, and we see the runs on the board for the more starch-based end of the spectrum. You know, possibly if you're an active young child, or you're an athlete, or someone struggling to keep up your calories on the more starch-based diet, even with Jenny's oatmeal cookies, you know, that might be a call for a few more nuts and seeds. And there might be some people who can still do all right eating more towards the oil, high fat plant food end of the spectrum. But I caution people on that.
Yeah. Well, I found, even for myself, I think when I first went plant-based back in 2012, I ate a lot of nuts and my weight was dropping off. But I think at that time it was a healthier fat and still lower in calories than what my traditional Western diet had had in it. But now, definitely in menopause, I certainly can't have many nuts at all. And I don't really use them in my diet, other than a little bit of almond milk here and there. But yeah, definitely a lot less. And when you think almonds and cashews, if you find them in the wild, they're going to have a shell around them, and they're not going to be in a big bag that you buy at the supermarket and can just dig into. So you would really have to put in the effort to crack that one nut open and eat that nut. So traditionally, I guess you would have been eating a lot less of those types of really calorie rich foods than what you can now.
They were sort of a special feasting Christmas sort of food before industrial agriculture came along, you know. And like we've traveled through San Francisco out towards Yosemite National Park actually last year at the International Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference, and traveled through kilometre after kilometre of almond groves, you know, sucking up huge amounts of water from the underground water supplies and things. So it's only industrial agriculture that's really brought us a food supply where most of us can now afford to eat large amounts of nuts all year round.
True. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been very educational. And like I said, my big takeaway for the day is fiber. Just look for fiber. Everything that you put in your mouth, does it have fiber? Fantastic. So if people want to get in touch with you, or I think you also do online consultations. So anyone around the world, if you want to have a chat with Malcolm and get in touch, you can do that. Where do people find you?
Well, I can only provide medical services to people in Australia, anywhere in Australia. Or they could go to my sort of doctor landing page, which is drmalcolmmackay.com.au, for details about the telehealth. But for other information about nutrition and about our events, like our Live In, we could have talked about our Live In Immersion event, even though it's been on hold this year, and our webinars. We've got a lot of information, and Jenny's former occupation as research support librarian has aided that. Our website, wholefoodsplantbasedhealth.com.au, has a wealth of resources about many aspects of nutrition.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, thank you again for joining me, and check out Malcolm and Jenny's website. There's definitely a lot of information there, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot more than we've even learnt today. So thank you for tuning in, and see you all next time. Bye for now.
Bye, Anja.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.